They took him off. And they took him off because the owner said, take him off. I don't want that guy.
It was the slide seen round the world, round after round. All eyes were on Shedeur Sanders, whose name was never called until the 5th round of the NFL draft Saturday, when the Cleveland Browns made Sanders the second quarterback they draft over the weekend.
It's one thing if the GM has the absolute call and he walks into the room and it's time to make the pick at 144 and he says...
There's no meeting and he says, I want this guy.
Two meetings. Right. What do you think the meetings were about? Consider the context.
On August 18th, 2025, the football world went into shock when the Browns made the jaw-dropping move of naming Joe Flacco their Week 1 starter over Shedeur Sanders. Now, things have gotten so wild that the NFL itself is stepping in. Reports say the CEO confronted the Browns owner and flat-out ordered Sanders to start, and the owner's response, it left everybody stunned. Let's take it back and unpack this mess. What happened on draft day exposed a darker side of the NFL than fans ever imagined. Shedeur Sanders is now caught in a storm of controversy. He's been pushed out of the starting role, yet somehow the NFL is backing him publicly, which is unheard of. But to really understand how we got here, you got to rewind to the moment where this all spiraled out of control. The 2025 NFL Draft, a day that will forever be remembered as the league's mask slipping off, showing an ugly truth that rattled the football world. We're talking about backroom power moves that felt more like politics than sports. Sanders, who balled out in 2024 with 4,134 yards, 37 touchdowns, and a jaw-dropping 74% completion rate, was seen as a lock for the top 3 picks. NFL stardom was supposed to be in his future, but instead, he sat there helpless as 143 names got called before his. He finally landed in Cleveland in the 5th round, and that free fall was so outrageous it sparked accusations of conspiracy, racism, and straight-up sabotage at the highest levels of NFL power.
His talent is not a 5th round talent. There's absolutely positively no excuse for waiting until the 5th round to take a quarterback who can play better than most quarterbacks available in the draft with the number of teams needing a quarterback. Y'all did this.
The league's embarrassment over the way Sanders was treated allegedly forced top executives to jump in. Word is, Commissioner Goodell himself picked up the phone during round 4, calling Browns owner Jimmy Haslam to make sure Sanders at least had a team before the draft wrapped up. According to insiders, Goodell stressed the optics, and let's be real, they were bad. A black quarterback with Sanders' stats sliding all the way through the draft. It was already trending on social media with fans calling it a disgrace. With the NFL pushing diversity initiatives front and center, Sanders' shocking slide became the exact nightmare the league wanted to avoid. Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back for a second. He called the situation a direct assault on Deion Sanders and even compared it to Colin Kaepernick's ordeal, dropping the kind of fiery outrage that could light up a whole city.
And I'm going to tell you, I spent a large amount of the last 24 hours thinking about nothing more than I was thinking about collusion. Because how in the hell does 32 teams in the National Football League pass on a quarterback that was universally recognized as one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country entering this draft, and 32 teams passed on them?
But here's the twist. This story goes way deeper than fans first realized, pulling in allegations of shady owner collusion, racial bias, and a commissioner so desperate to clean up the league's image that he allegedly forced one of the NFL's messiest franchises to play the role of unlikely saviors. In Shedeur Sanders' case, the Browns' decision-making turned into pure chaos, the kind of dysfunction that would make a soap opera writer take notes. It also showed just how much outside pressure can corner even the most stubborn owners. Jimmy Haslam, the man at the top in Cleveland, publicly tried to separate himself from the Sanders pick, saying, if you'd have told me Friday night y'all are gonna pick Shedeur, I would have said that's not happening. And instead of taking accountability, Haslam pointed the finger at GM Andrew Berry. But this wasn't just tossing Berry under the bus, this was backing it up, running him over, and doing it with a smile, all while pretending he had nothing to do with the commissioner's alleged involvement. Still, Haslam's comments didn't just sound shady. They exposed something darker about how the NFL really works and the insane pressure cooker environment behind those draft decisions. Reports say the Browns actually held 2 separate meetings on draft day, specifically about Sanders. Now think about that. Owners don't hold multiple executive meetings over a 5th round prospect. That level of attention screamed that something bigger was in play. Analysts pointed out it only made sense if outside influence was driving the conversation. And where would that pressure come from? Sources claim all signs point back to Park Avenue, NFL headquarters, where the league pulls strings like a puppet master, keeping that so-called competitive balance while stepping in whenever they think the league's image is at risk. The commissioner's alleged involvement wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders as a player, it was about saving the NFL's image during a draft that had turned into a PR disaster. With every round, Sanders went unpicked. By the time Cleveland scooped him up, their quarterback room looked like a circus, pure chaos mixed with reluctant compliance to league pressure. The Browns ended up with 5 quarterbacks: Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Deshaun Watson, and now Sanders. That's not a quarterback room, that's a crowded kennel, and somebody was bound to get pushed out. From the jump, it looked like Sanders was the odd man out, despite all the drama it took just to get him there. The real head-scratcher? The Browns had already drafted Oregon quarterback Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, just 50 picks before Sanders. Gabriel, who most experts projected as a late rounder, somehow got picked ahead of Sanders, who many believed was first-round talent. It was like Cleveland was stockpiling quarterbacks the way kids collect Pokemon cards, except here it came with way more tension, way less logic, and the looming shadow of league office oversight that turned every move into a political calculation instead of a football decision. Then came the training camp drama, and that's where the whispers of sabotage started. Reports claim Sanders was barely getting first-team reps, sometimes being thrown into meaningless drills, even tossing passes to equipment staff instead of real receivers. Fans and analysts started accusing the Browns of deliberately holding him back, trying to prove their reluctance was justified while still pretending they were invested in him. Stephen A. Smith let it rip again, saying flat out that the Browns were setting Sanders up to fail.
Guy was considered one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft, and 143 picks came and went before you heard his name. Don't talk to me about football. I don't want to hear a damn thing about football. This ain't about football. This is about something else.
Painting it as a coordinated scheme to defend their questionable draft moves and show the league that no amount of commissioner pressure could force them to truly embrace him. The absurdity peaked when Sanders, after showing flashes of brilliance in his preseason debut, was suddenly sidelined with an oblique injury. To many, it felt less like bad luck and more like another convenient roadblock in a saga that was already looking scripted. The timing of Shedeur Sanders' injury felt way too convenient for an organization that clearly seemed uneasy about their 5th-round pick suddenly blowing up. His preseason setback looked like the perfect excuse to shove him back into the shadows. And this wasn't just speculation. Sanders had just balled out in his debut, completing 14 of 23 passes for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. He even caught the attention of LeBron James, who gave him props publicly, but instead of capitalizing on that momentum, the Browns quickly downplayed him, almost as if his success was a problem. The irony? From a money standpoint, Sanders was already the Browns' golden ticket. Projections had him set to rake in over $10 million in 2025 from endorsements alone, making him the highest-earning rookie in the entire league. On top of that, his jersey sales were flying past every other rookie's, cementing him as Cleveland's most marketable star. Yet somehow, the team acted like they wanted him hidden, refusing to fully embrace the very player driving their biggest business boom. That dysfunction exploded into public view when Sanders confronted longtime Cleveland reporter Tony Grossi after his preseason game. The tense moment caught on camera showed Sanders asking, "What did I do to you?"
So I've been hoping you got something positive to say about me. You always say negative stuff about me. No. And I'm like, I ain't do nothing to you.
No, don't think that.
I ain't seen nothing positive that you ever say.
A direct shot at Grossi's constant negative coverage. Some fans praised Sanders for standing his ground, while others claimed the move showed immaturity, fueling the same narrative that supposedly explained his draft day slide. Either way, the drama was front-page news. By now, it wasn't just about football, and it was bigger. Whispers of conspiracy grew louder with claims of collusion between owners, racial bias baked into draft decisions, and commissioner-level meddling to keep the NFL from looking worse than it already did. What started as questions about Sanders' interviews had snowballed into full-blown accusations of a league-wide plot. The idea that the NFL was intentionally trying to humble the Sanders family was spreading fast, and the scandal was getting so huge, even comparisons to Watergate didn't seem over the top. And then came the hammer, what insiders call unprecedented intervention straight from Commissioner Roger Goodell's office. Things blew up when Antonio Brown dropped his own bombshell on August 1st, 2025, claiming NFL owners had a secret agreement not to draft Shedeur Sanders. According to Brown, the only reason Sanders landed in Cleveland was because Browns owner Jimmy Haslam broke that pact, but only under direct pressure from league headquarters. Brown insisted Haslam won't admit it publicly because doing so would blow the lid off the entire scheme, exposing both the collusion between owners and the commissioner's role in forcing compliance. If true, this wasn't just a scandal, Lance. This was the kind of alleged collusion that makes antitrust lawyers lick their chops, NFL commissioners lose sleep, and federal investigators start pulling old RICO playbooks off the shelf. The conspiracy theory picked up even more credibility when Boomer Esiason went on WFAN, claiming he personally spoke with staff from 3 different teams who confirmed their owners ordered them to completely scrub Sanders from their draft boards. Esiason's sources said owners literally told them, "Take him off." "I don't want that guy." Sanders was reportedly branded entitled, a talking point that smelled less like scouting analysis and more like coordinated messaging handed down from the top. The fact that multiple front offices were given nearly identical instructions pointed to something far deeper than coincidence. Stephen A. Smith didn't miss his shot either. He tied the dots together and called it out as what it looked like: collusion on the level of Colin Kaepernick. With his trademark fire, Smith declared this situation had the same ugly undertones of systematic discrimination in pro sports, and his take sent shockwaves across the media.
Primetime Deion Sanders' natural bravado, coupled with that of his son, they say that the whole interview process wasn't that impressive. When he showed up at the NFL scouting combine and refused to work out, that hurt him. The interview process while he was there hurt him, etc., etc.
And this wasn't just speculation. The numbers backed it up. The odds of Sanders falling that far in the draft with his insane college stats and the glaring need for quarterbacks across the league were nearly impossible without some kind of coordinated effort. That's why the racial element of this scandal couldn't be ignored. Things escalated even further when a Colorado Buffaloes fan filed a $100 million lawsuit in May 2025, accusing the NFL of racial discrimination in Sanders' slide. Suddenly, the league wasn't just facing bad press, they were bracing for legal warfare on a scale that screamed civil rights battle. The $100 million lawsuit didn't pull any punches. It called the leaked statements about Sanders' attitude straight-up slander and argued they violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Even more explosive was the mention of a mysterious 61-page arbitration report that allegedly uncovered evidence of collusion against black quarterbacks. The plaintiffs' lawyers claimed they had proof of coordinated communications between NFL ownership groups, though those details remained sealed until trial. The secrecy only made the conspiracy theories feel even more believable. Fans couldn't ignore the double standards staring them in the face. Take Eli Manning in 2004. He forced his way out of San Diego and faced zero backlash. Yet Sanders was supposedly punished for his father's outspoken advocacy. The comparison painted an ugly picture. When white quarterbacks flexed their leverage, it was framed as business. But when a black quarterback did the same, suddenly it was entitlement. The optics screamed racial bias. Things hit a boiling point when Dr. Umar Johnson jumped into the mix, demanding Deion Sanders sue the NFL for $40 million. He claimed Shedeur's draft slide was fueled by racial discrimination and even called for a federal investigation. His words lit a fire under fans, especially those who felt Shedeur's treatment wasn't an isolated incident, but part of the NFL's long history of punishing black athletes who refuse to bow to outdated expectations of humility and silence. Of course, not everyone bought into the conspiracy. Hall of Famer Chris Carter tried to push back on his podcast, saying there was not a collusion message with the NFL owners. They wouldn't be able to keep a secret like that, but even as he dismissed the idea of a secret pact, Carter admitted Sanders' draft slide was unprecedented and statistically bizarre without some kind of outside influence. His own explanation? Poor pre-draft decisions, skipping the combine, weak interviews, and bad advice. He argued those mistakes cost Sanders $30 to $50 million. But he couldn't answer why white prospects with the same red flags hadn't been punished nearly as harshly. The noise grew so loud that Commissioner Roger Goodell himself was forced to step in. Sources say he convened an emergency damage control session behind closed doors, scrambling to stop the collusion narrative from exploding even further and dragging the league's power structure into the spotlight. In July 2025, Roger Goodell tried to shut it all down in a press conference, flatly denying any blackballing. The NFL doesn't blackball talent, he insisted, even pointing to Tom Brady's 6th-round selection as proof that draft slides just reflect team evaluations, not conspiracies. But instead of easing doubts, His defensive tone, combined with whispers of his behind-the-scenes intervention to make sure Sanders was drafted at all, only added more smoke to the fire. If everything was really above board, why would the commissioner have to get involved in the first place? The timing of Sanders' eventual selection only deepened the suspicions. Cleveland didn't just sit back and wait, they actually traded up to snag him at pick 144. On paper, that suggested they valued him more than his late-round slot showed. But to conspiracy watchers, it looked like classic damage control, last-minute scrambling triggered by league office pressure. Some even claimed the move signaled that an embargo on drafting Sanders had quietly been lifted once the message was sent and the league gave teams the green light to grab him without risking owner backlash. What made all of this so dangerous for the NFL was simple. It was plausible. The league already had a track record. Back in 2019, they quietly settled Colin Kaepernick's collusion case, establishing legal precedent that the NFL could act in coordinated ways against players it deemed problematic. That history made Sanders' treatment feel way too familiar, especially given the racial dynamics woven into both stories. Observers were quick to connect the dots, pointing to a disturbing pattern of black athletes being punished whenever they dared to push back against the NFL's old-school power structure. And then there was Deion Sanders himself. As a Hall of Fame legend and massive media personality, his influence might have fueled the resentment against his son. Owners reportedly saw his pre-draft comments about avoiding certain teams and his hands-on management of Shedeur's career as entitlement, behavior they didn't appreciate. But here's the catch. Deion's star power also made it impossible for the league to erase his son completely. Completely blackballing Shedeur would have been a PR nightmare, one the NFL couldn't afford. So instead, the commissioner allegedly stepped in to manage the situation delicately, strategically, and very quietly. The conspiracy theory took its boldest turn when people began saying Shedeur Sanders wasn't just being punished, he was being used to send a message to Deion Sanders himself: you don't run the league. At the same time, the whispers about commissioner intervention made it clear that NFL leadership knew this drama was spiraling into something far more dangerous than they could control. And the legal risks? Absolutely massive. If proven true, this kind of owner collusion wouldn't just be scandalous, it could be a full-blown violation of antitrust law, exposing the NFL to billions in damages. Add in the possibility of federal civil rights investigations, and suddenly the league's shiny diversity campaigns start looking like nothing but window dressing. The fact that they seemed willing to gamble with that kind of exposure rather than draft Sanders earlier showed one of two things. Either the league was squeaky clean, or their arrogance was so breathtaking they thought they'd never get caught. Goodell's alleged behind-the-scenes involvement only underscored how desperate the league was to stop this narrative before it exploded. But either way, the whole saga shredded the NFL's image as a pure meritocracy. Instead, it opened the door to deeper questions about power, race, and how influence truly operates in America's most watched sport. And here's where things get complicated. Behind all the conspiracy smoke and collusion chatter lies the reality of Shedeur Sanders himself. A gifted quarterback with undeniable talent, but also a polarizing figure whose pre-draft actions raised legit concerns for some scouts. His refusal to follow the traditional script gave teams reasons, real or imagined, to second-guess him, even as his stats screamed franchise player. He became the rare prospect who exposed both the NFL's systemic biases and the genuine evaluation dilemmas that keep general managers awake at night. Shedeur Sanders' college resume wasn't just good, it was legendary. 14,343 passing yards, a 70.7% completion rate, 141 touchdowns, and an NCAA record 49 straight games with a touchdown pass. Those aren't the stats of a fifth-round flyer. Those are the numbers of a franchise quarterback in waiting, the type who usually hears his name called on day one of the draft.
I believe that he was worse than Dylan Gabriel, who I love. I love Dylan Gabriel as a person. Watched him live as a player multiple times. No, he's better than Dylan Gabriel.
That's right.
He's a better football player than Dylan Gabriel.
By every football standard, Sanders should have been a first-round lock, yet somehow he slid further than almost any hyped quarterback in recent memory. That bizarre paradox fueled the debate. Was it systematic bias, or were there real character concerns that spooked teams? The first major red flag popped up during the pre-draft process when Sanders refused to throw at the NFL Combine. Instead, he limited his workouts to Colorado's Pro Day. NFL executives saw that as a power move, arrogant and entitled because the league expects prospects to prove themselves on the same stage as their peers? Other top quarterbacks had no issue stepping up at the combine, but Sanders choosing not to fed the perception that he thought he was above the normal evaluation process, that rubbed teams the wrong way. But it wasn't just the workouts. The interview process reportedly did even more damage to his stock. Behind closed doors, anonymous scouts described Sanders as cocky, dismissive, and at times unprepared. Some came away questioning his coachability and whether he could handle criticism. For NFL decision-makers, those traits are red flags bigger than a bad stat line. The most damning story came from one team that pressed him on weaknesses in his film. Instead of engaging, Sanders allegedly shrugged and said, "Maybe I'm not the guy for you." To evaluators, that wasn't confidence. That was a giant stop sign. In their eyes, that type of response screamed uncoachable. And no matter how good his arm looked on tape, that attitude alone could tank his draft stock. For a league obsessed with control and hierarchy, that was the ultimate red flag. One of the most damning knocks against Shedeur Sanders came from his interviews, specifically the football IQ test that every quarterback prospect faces. Teams reportedly planted deliberate mistakes into their defensive playbooks, a standard trick to test a quarterback's preparation, attention to detail, and to process schemes on the fly. Dillon Gabriel passed that test. Sanders, he allegedly didn't catch the errors. A failure that raised serious doubts about whether he could handle the mental grind of NFL quarterbacking. And when coaches pointed out the mistakes, insiders say Sanders didn't take the criticism well, only fueling more concern about his maturity and coachability. But the baggage went way beyond Shedeur himself. Drafting him meant drafting the entire Sanders machine, complete with media hype, non-stop social media buzz, and the looming presence of his legendary father. Deion Sanders' high-profile persona and his history of tightly managing Shedeur's career scared off front offices. Executives worried that every decision, from depth chart battles to play calling, would turn into a public circus with Deion hovering in the background.
Okay, if this guy's coming in and he's not that guy, if he's going to be maybe a backup quarterbacks are obscure. They're not guys that's in the forefront. And so if you're a team, do you want a guy that's going to come in with all the celebrity, everything that comes with Shedeur Sanders?
The fear wasn't just about coaching Shedeur. It was about whether coaches would ever truly be free to coach him at all. The whispers got even louder with speculation that Deion might eventually try to angle for a coaching role in the NFL himself. For most franchises, that sounded like a nightmare, an organizational headache they'd rather avoid altogether. Add in Shedeur's own off-field concerns, and the red flags started stacking up. In early 2025, he was hit with 2 speeding tickets, one for going 91 in a 65, another for hitting 101 in a 60. On the surface, minor incidents, but to NFL evaluators trained to spot character patterns, those citations only reinforced the perception of immaturity and questionable judgment. Even Browns GM Andrew Berry called the behavior not smart, highlighting that the concerns didn't vanish after the draft. Then came the football-specific doubts. Despite his monster stats, Sanders had been sacked a jaw-dropping 152 times in college, with 94 of those coming in just his final 2 seasons. To scouts, that wasn't just bad offensive line play. It raised red flags about his pocket presence, decision-making under pressure, and whether he could read blitzes at an NFL level. If college defenders rattled him, how would he survive against pro defenses designed to expose weaknesses instantly? Shedeur's plea for his dad to stay away from practices showed both his hunger for independence and his frustration with limited reps. Proof his development was moving slower than expected. That frustration boiled over after his preseason debut when he confronted reporter Tony Grossi, a moment that displayed both confidence and a thin skin toward criticism. Some applauded his boldness, while others saw the immaturity teams had feared all along. To make matters worse, the exchange was filmed by his brother's media company and blasted online, reinforcing the belief that the Sanders family thrives on turning drama into content. Yet despite the chaos, Sanders' debut was electric. He went 14 for 23 with 138 yards and 2 touchdowns against Carolina, earning praise from LeBron James and ESPN's Dan Orlovsky. His accuracy and poise reminded everyone why he was once considered first-round talent. The truth, Sanders represents both enormous risk and undeniable upside. A quarterback who could flame out under pressure or with the right coaching rise into stardom. In the end, Shedeur Sanders became the perfect storm, a mix of undeniable talent, controversial choices, and nonstop outside noise. NFL teams historically handle players like this in very different ways, depending on their philosophy, risk tolerance, and how much chaos they're willing to manage. The conspiracy theories about his draft slide will keep buzzing, raising serious questions about bias in the NFL. But the truth is, Sanders' own actions and attitude also gave teams plenty of football-related reasons to hesitate, no matter how impressive his college stats were. Did those reasons really justify him free-falling all the way to the 5th round? That's the debate, and the answer will come only from how Sanders' NFL career plays out. If he succeeds, the league will face even harsher questions. If he fails, critics will say the red flags were there all along. For now, Sanders sits in Cleveland's overcrowded quarterback room, scrapping for every rep, every throw, and every shot to prove his doubters wrong, while also trying to reward the few who still believe he can be a star. So what do you think? Was Shedeur Sanders blackballed by the NFL, or was he just his own worst enemy? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next big breakdown. See you in the next one.